Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Shape the System. I'm absolutely stoked today to be talking to Ronni Kahn from OzHarvest. And welcome to the show, Ronni.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so as always, we are just going to dive straight into problem space that you and OzHarvest are working on. Now, anyone in Australia who hasn't seen one of these yellow vans or yellow stickers somewhere is, living under a rock somewhere. But for people who aren't in Australia, I'd love to talk about what OzHarvest is and the challenge and the magnitude of the challenge that you've been solving in Australia now for almost 17 years, I think.
Well, thank you. We actually deal with two separate and interesting challenges because they converge in many different ways. So the first biggest challenge that I started OzHarvest for was this notion of surplus food.
Right.
I didn't know when I started OzHarvest that a third of all food goes to waste. I didn't know that it's costing the economy $1 trillion and it's costing Australia it's now $30 billion a year.
In wasted food. Right.
I didn't know that. Nor did I know the effect of wasting food on climate change.
Right.
Let's start talking just about the issue. So
sure.
I start collecting food, thinking I'll just do this for a little bit because I'll just stop waste and then I'll get on with doing what else I need.
Whatever else I was doing at the time.
And then I discovered the magnitude
sure.
of this problem, which is humongous. And 17 years ago, nobody was talking about it. And it's really taken that amount of time, this overnight success for people to start talking about food waste. But it didn't take long for me to also understand that there was this huge environmental impact.
Interesting.
What most people don't know today is that food waste feeds climate change.
Right.
That is because when food waste goes into landfill, it gives off methane, which is however many times worse than carbon dioxide.
Yep, 18 times or something. Yep.
Exactly. And this is what's impacting global warming.
Right.
Now, so really the two challenges I'm now trying to tackle are how do we make sure that any good quality surplus food feeds vulnerable people before it goes to landfill, before it goes to feed animals, before it goes to any of the other options.
Right.
It should feed people.
Yep.
The second issue is how do we stop a third of all food going to waste?
In general.
Generally.
Right.
How do we stop food waste? We will never reach the point that there isn't food to feed those vulnerable people, but there will and should be less.
Right.
So the upside of that is that I spend time educating vulnerable people so that we can upskill them so that they need less food.
Right.
And citizens, consumers, all of us, how not to waste food so that there's less food waste.
Right. Got it.
So it is interesting because they're the two sides and people ask, but aren't you going to do yourself out of business? Well, that would be my dream. That's been my dream since the day I started OzHarvest, to put ourselves out of business.
Well, I mean, there's a 7 billion person problem here, I'm guessing, rather than just an Australian challenge.
Exactly. And the issue is that all the time that there's food waste, they're vulnerable people. All the time they're hungry people, we need to feed them. So how do we solve problems and not just put Band-Aids on them?
Got it. And so let's because it's interesting because my understanding of OzHarvest on what I've read and the book, which we'll come to a bit later on, the initial motivation was all this food's going to waste. Why aren't we feeding people, right? You were coming out of an events that you've been running, these beautiful big events, and you're like, there's beautiful food. There's nothing wrong with it. Someone should be eating it. And then the environmental part came later when How did that part of it evolve? Well, because that wasn't part of the narrative initially, right?
Definitely wasn't part of the narrative. It wasn't, I literally didn't know the scale of the problem. And I also didn't know what the problem was creating another problem.
Right.
A bigger problem.
Right.
So there were two. It didn't take long. I think it probably within the first year, it became very apparent that actually there are two big things here.
Right.
And this whole environmental notion. So in the beginning, it was, okay, we're stopping the food from going to landfill. Who even knew the word landfill?
Right.
Before? None of us even knew where does waste food go to if we're not eating.
Magical place.
Exactly. It just disappears into the ether, and that's the problem.
Right.
It does disappear into the ether.
Right.
And then the more we started investigating, the more I started understanding why people loved OzHarvest so much. They loved it and immediately connected because every single one of us at some point has been told, eat your food because there's someone starving somewhere. Right. So, I didn't have to be that teacher. I just came up with a solution for that, and people just loved that.
And is part of that actually that there's a few different narratives here? So for people who, think this is a waste and just don't like wastage generally, that's what they attach to others, or that there's people who are needlessly not eating, that's part of the problem. There's environmental impact. There's so many facets to this. You can kind of choose your own point to engage with the story.
Exactly, which is why I think OzHarvest has had the success that it's had. Because on the one hand, I didn't have to teach anybody anything because people had learned it from their grandparents, from their parents. They understood this notion that it's not good to waste.
Right.
Now we've become a very consumptive society, so that has eroded over time.
Right.
But what people do love was that, wow, it makes so much sense. Surplus food should feed hungry people.
Sure.
That's the narrative that anybody thinks, God, that's just that's just logic.
Right.
That makes so much sense. Then when they start understanding what food does when it goes to landfill, there's this double whammy because you're going to now tap into the climate activists and the environmentalists, not those that care about the well-being of people. Even though I would hope that there's this deep correlation. But there are people who
more care about that.
That we doing by saving good food from going to landfill. The fact that we're making sure that surplus does feed people is to them a bonus.
Right.
Whereas there are those that just say, wow, what OzHarvest does is it makes sure that all surplus food feeds people. And the fact that it's not going to landfill is a bonus.
Well, that's good too. If I'm tracking from sort of 2004 and you talked a little bit about policy work and education, it started in practical terms with there's all this food that is going to waste initially in the events that you're running, but then you're like, where else is it happening, right? Supermarkets and, restaurants and the like. And so you come with a whole set of, well, let's just practically move that food from this location to this location. Now, massively oversimplifying, I realise. There's a whole lot more to that.
No, but I often say, Vincent, I'm a transport and logistics company. I just pick up for free and deliver for free.
But you obviously started there, and that was not a Band-Aid, but a way of solving the immediate pain of the problem. But what OzHarvest seems to have really evolved to now is like the medium is the message for how do you actually think about food waste more broadly. And part of this is obviously moving food that would otherwise go to landfill here. But I'd love to talk a bit more about where that's elevated to in regards to education and policy. The stuff was fascinating, which I was reading in your book.
So what's so interesting now is I'm really looking to, in a way, rebrand OzHarvest so that people understand the depth and the breadth of what we do.
Right.
Because you see those beautiful yellow trucks and you think, food rescue, how wonderful. And it is wonderful.
Right.
But actually, if I were to draw a circle, there would be food rescue, there would be education, there would be innovation, there would be advocacy, because they all connect to who we are. So the education piece, I'm so glad you brought it up, because what's happened over the last 17 years is people have gone on a bit of a journey, but not far enough on the journey.
Right. From an education perspective.
From an education perspective.
Right.
So on the very first education program I rolled out was because we were delivering extraordinary quality food to people who'd never received that food and they didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
So we created a cooking program called NEST, Nice, Easy, Simple Tips, or Nutrition, Education, Sustenance Training.
Whatever acronym you'd like.
Exactly. To teach vulnerable people how to use this beautiful food and how to save money by using the food and understanding the value of food.
Sure.
But then what we realized was, okay, that's cool. We could teach them. But then we realized that actually children, families don't understand the issue of food waste. They don't understand sustainability, and we've lost the value of food.
Mm.
We can walk into a supermarket 24/7, get the same quality early in the morning, late at night. That's when we just think food grows on the supermarket shelves and we've forgotten what it takes to get that food there.
Right.
And so we've rolled out programs that go into schools.
Into primary schools, high schools. Yep.
Primary and high school.
Yep.
It's that program is called Feast, and that's also food education and sustainability training.
Yep.
Because it teaches the teachers don't have time to build curriculum.
Right.
The notion of home economics. When I was at school, we had a program.
Baking cakes, I remember.
We used to bake cakes, but we understood what to do in the kitchen.
Sure.
Well, there are very many kids and adults today who don't know even how to boil an egg. It's quicker to go and buy a processed meal or to buy convenience food. And we need to break that down. We need people to understand what it takes every time you buy an apple, you take a bite, you throw it away, or you don't choose the one that doesn't look beautiful because you think that all apples grow the same size, the same color.
Yeah.
And we need to break that down. So our Feast program is so powerful because kids then go back home and become little eco warriors.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is that actually the way through to the parents, is to just get the kids going, I want to bake food. I don't want to keep having pre-made or...
Absolutely. And they come home with facts and figures and say, Mum, that lettuce that's in our fridge, if we don't eat it and we put it into the bin, it will take it 25 years to decompose. But if we put it into landfill, if we put it into compost, if we didn't eat it, we should eat it in the first place.
Right, sure.
But if we didn't, it'll take 2 weeks to decompose.
Right.
So, and getting a kid to say, and Mum, that lettuce cost you $2, you think, but actually there's water, there's energy, there's embedded labor, then actually that lettuce should be $10.
Right.
Unless we teach people this, they don't know it. They've forgotten it. And,
Yeah. And then it's interesting because I think there's kind of a portion of food that just in the process, it's almost at the very end of the process that food gets wasted, right, in the typical sense of the word. But by moving sort of further upstream, you're thinking, well, A, we might stem some of that problem, but B, most of the major food waste that's happening is happening in our homes on a day-to-day basis where we don't have a relationship with food. That means we think about its consumption and preservation and the best way to deal with it. Is that sort of where that's going?
Well, out of the $30 billion of food that's wasted every year, 15 billion of that is from our homes. 15 billion is industry.
Right.
So at the same time, we're working with industry to create changes.
Right.
And so advocacy and sustainability, I now have a team that is around sustainability. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what's interesting is we will be releasing world first information because we've been working with Monash University and Deakin University and behavioral scientists to understand, because it's the hardest thing to shift
behavior.
I mean, you just have to look through this current vaccine fiasco, but that's because it was so badly handled.
Right.
But, we don't like to shift and change our behavior.
Like I've actually moved my office to be closer to where the warmth is because it's quite cold up here in the mountains at the moment. So I'm nearer the fridge. I have a lot of fresh fruit and veg. You can see some of it behind me here. But what I've actually realised as a slight tangent is that all of the stuff that is fresh fruit and vegetables is in the fridge. It's hidden in the drawers. And I've realised it's out of sight, out of mind. And I've said, you know what, the crisper is saving food, except I don't see it, and so I throw it out. I put everything that doesn't degrade in the crisper and everything else on show, so I eat it first.
Well, you've just proved exactly what all of our ethnological tests have shown.
Right.
That it's out of mind and we forget it. So how are we going to physically find a way to get people to remember to use that food up?
Yeah. There was actually an interesting study in the US around UX where they behavioral science, where they basically wanted kids to eat more healthy. And they realized that the kid would arrive hungry and the first thing they put on the plate, they would put the most of because they're hungry. By the time they get to the end of the line, there's no room on the plate. And they just swapped the order of the food.
Yeah.
Kids started eating better because there wasn't room for the chips at the very end of the line.
Exactly.
There's got to be some hacks like that. Just talking a little bit more about this kind of this layer. I'm calling it an onion, but you had it kind of in 4 or 5 pieces: education, advocacy, the actual dealing with it. I'm interested in terms of the elevation from let's get the food that's being wasted in a van to a restaurant. Let's help people stop wasting food. And one of the things that you've launched as a group recently is this ForPurposeCo, which moves you out of the kind of non-profit sense and into a social impact venture that's feeding back. Can we just dive into that for a little bit?
Sure. As a business, we only have 2 revenue streams, which were completely shattered through COVID. The one is our CEO Cook-Off, which is this beautiful event that was scheduled to take place on the 21st of March, 2020, and bring us in $3 million. And on the 15th of March, I pulled that event because we couldn't. It's face-to-face with 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And one of our other revenue streams is our team building events, which are legendary. Corporates pay us to bring their teams to do this beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
And we basically have to pull it. And that brings us about $2 million a year.
Right.
So knowing that, this is pre-pandemic, we launched ForPurposeCo, but not knowing that, but just understanding that we need consistent revenue.
Right.
And so it felt to me like, what if we created an innovative company that was attached to OzHarvest, used the brand of OzHarvest, but was there to bring to life business that started creating a revenue stream for OzHarvest. Mm-hmm. And that was the genesis of ForPurposeCo.
Right.
And little did I know when we were looking for names, and I said, well, really, what I want is it is the ForPurposeCo.
Right.
And then we just laughed and we said, okay, well, if it exists. And lo and behold, nobody had taken that name.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
Which was so perfect. And so the ForPurposeCo was born with the purpose of bringing to life anything that's in alignment with our values. So it's either around waste, it's either around agri-tech, it's either around creating something within the food industry that is going to support our core purpose, which is
the relationship with food and
the relationship, nourishing. Our purpose is to nourish our country. So it's to bring something to life that adds value to that.
Yeah.
And that's how the ForPurposeCo was born. And our first and so far most successful, although during COVID is very challenged, business is our Juice for Good.
Yeah. This kind of self-contained vending machine with old bunch juices in it. I don't know what the right word is, but the oranges that people wouldn't otherwise eat. It's an epic machine. I love it.
It's beautiful. It's this juice is the nectar of gods. It's so exquisite because they're oranges that it doesn't matter about their shape or size, and it doesn't matter if they're perfect or beautiful, that the supermarkets and we reject because we want beautiful, perfect brown wine.
We being humanity, not we being OzHarvest in this case. Yeah.
No. We being citizens, consumers, seem to have been trained to now want beautiful produce.
Right.
And so our Juice for Good was doing so well, but during COVID, you can't really go up to a machine and touch it.
They're all on site or inside a cafe as a component of a cafe.
They were just building up again in New South Wales. So far the business is only in New South Wales, these freestanding orange juice, fresh orange juice, chilled orange juice vending machine that people just
That's
love.
the critical part, by the way, Ronni.
Well, they have people get so excited by them, and we have fans and devotees of
Yeah. They've got their own hashtag, I'm sure.
exactly our own vending machine. But of course, we've just gone back into lockdown in New South Wales, so the machines, there's nobody. We all got stay-at-home orders, so nobody.
Right. No one can get their fresh orange juice.
We're looking at the next evolution of
Just
that.
trying to understand a bit about that as a good use case. So ForPurposeCo incubated that. Someone came to you and said, I want to do this thing, and we went, great, we're going to help you do that and use our brand and our network.
Somebody told me there was a machine in Singapore. I said, buy me, get me 2.
Right. We'll start with 2.
We started with 2 and now we've got 60.
Okay, amazing. So it wasn't like an entrepreneur came and said, I want to do this thing and you're the way to take it. You went, what are the products and services we can offer as a company to drive that?
Absolutely. And we started looking for ideas, and somebody said, I've seen this in Singapore. And we looked at it and it wasn't anywhere in Australia. And I said, I love it because they weren't using, in Singapore, are not using recycled oranges or pre-loved oranges or repurposed oranges or just plain ugly oranges.
Beautiful oranges. What are we talking about?
It also didn't have much character. So I said, let's get these 2 machines. There were a couple of modifications we had to make. We wanted compostable cups.
Yep.
We didn't want to use straws. And if we did use straws, we sourced plant-based straws.
Sure.
And we took away that you can use cash, but we made it possible to just touch with a credit card.
Right. Upskilled it for the Australian environment. Also the context. A few times since we've been talking today, there's always this thought about brand and how this thing works. And I feel like brand is so central to how you've thought about OzHarvest and everything around it, but also how it's evolved over the years. I'd love to just talk about the brand and the way you imagine it and how it's evolved and like the importance and the role it plays in everything you're doing.
Sure. So it's interesting because I've never studied marketing and I am not a brand builder. However,
I beg to differ.
however, what I have managed to do and we have managed to do, which differentiated us right from the start as a charity.
Sure.
I've always treated OzHarvest from the day that I set it up as a business. Right. And the fact that always was a for-purpose business in that it was never a not-for-profit. As far as I was concerned, I don't think Microsoft, I don't think Woolworths, I don't think Atlassian ever thought of themselves as a not-for-loss.
Right.
So why should I have thought of myself as a not-for-profit?
Right.
I always thought of us as a for-profit, but you measure our profit differently. So right from the start, OzHarvest was all about the brand, the value proposition we'd offer to anyone who wanted to get involved with us. Right. So whether it was through time or money or food.
Right.
And right from the start, I knew that yellow, I just loved, what I knew about yellow was that it's happy, it makes people smile, but it's also very visible. Take my grandson, my 4-year-old grandson to kindy this morning.
Right.
Kindy for 4-year-olds is still open. And on the drive, he said, Safi, he calls me Safi.
Okay.
He said, there's yellow everywhere. He said, look, they're yellow signs, they're yellow bins. And from Bondi to Randwick, all we did was look for yellow. And I said, that's why Safi made OzHarvest yellow, because you can see it everywhere. So that was pure luck and in some ways pure genius, but I would never give myself that credit. It was naive personal enjoyment about this gorgeous color that made me smile.
Yeah. You start with that as the kind of the core of it. And I think, look, the visual aspect of brand is obviously what everyone kind of attaches themselves to. And OzHarvest is incredibly visible as a brand because of this.
Yeah.
But I think about brand more in the kind of the brand messaging and strategy level. I think it's a very well crafted brand, and it obviously has elevated beyond simply saving food from putting it in this plate so these people don't have. Like, I'm interested in that thinking, how much of that sort of evolved and came about, or how much of it was like, we need to be very considered here. Because I think most companies, especially for-purpose companies, intuitively know it but don't actually articulate it that well.
Yeah. So two things. I do want to absolutely clarify that we had the support to design the look of our brand from Vince Frost, which is Frost Design, and he is a genius, just to choose our font and help us. But that was already a couple of years in.
Sure.
The evolution of how we do the things we do really came from this intention that OzHarvest exists for its impact. So how do we make the biggest impact we can?
Right.
And if by rescuing food, we're making a wonderful impact because we're feeding people, then if you start understanding and unpacking that actually this notion, the bigger problem is that there's food waste in the first place.
Right.
There are 7 billion people on our planet. There will be 9 or 10.
Yep.
And there is enough food to feed everyone. There is something fundamentally broken in the food system.
Sure.
And that didn't take me that long to realize. And then it was, how do we start putting in the steps to start tackling the big problem?
Right.
And that's really how our thinking has always evolved into first the education. The first education program was our nest where we fed people. But the second one was actually where we take vulnerable youth and put them through hospitality and skills training to give them the ability to get jobs. Because if I've got to upskill people so there are less people that we need to feed, we have to start being the solution to that.
Right. What better thing to teach them how to deal with food?
Yeah, well, that's giving people an opportunity who have fallen through the system, who've never had role models. And that's our Nourish program. And that is literally where we take youth, and we've put about 300 kids through that program.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, they stand up at their graduation, where they've never graduated from anything, and said that we've opened a door that they didn't even know existed. So, that is incredibly powerful.
That's super cool. And you sort of touched on it just before, but it's kind of mentioned a little bit directly and indirectly in the book, which, by the way, is amazing. I read it on the train in and out in my semi-lockdown. And got kind of emotional at the end of it, actually, to be honest, which was interesting because I'm reading this bright yellow book on a train and people are like, what the hell? These guys welling up on the train. The thing I wanted to kind of understand a bit was, and you even just mentioned it, right, was this idea of kind of luck and serendipity. And I want to, like, over the course of that, book and the arc of that story, I think it's Helen in LA who you met, and then there's Des and Julie, I believe, in the Macquarie link early on. There's luck in these people coming into your orbit, but then there's obviously something you're doing to attach yourself to that. I want to talk a little bit about luck, serendipity, and how much of it finds you and how much you're finding.
Look, I definitely think that I intentionally attract what the universe has to bring. Now, I know that sounds really woo-woo and a problem for many people, but it just happens to be true.
Sure.
I attract the person who comes to us, loves our pop-up little cafe, and says, okay, well, when it's closed, that makes me sad. And I say, yeah, so what could we do about it? And she says, well, maybe we have to buy a building. Sure. And that restaurant is going to open in a month's time.
Right.
The building that somebody bought me. Now, my intention has always been to open a restaurant for vulnerable people, and it comes to life. So I have a lot of practical embodiment of the intentions I set out. So it might be woo-woo, but then it gets facilitated.
In practical terms, then, it sounds to me what's happening is obviously there's this beautiful narrative and arc of a story, and the brand there supports it, which kind of opens the door, right? People see this bright thing and they want to be associated with it. It makes them happy, or they like the story. And then something happens when they sort of cross the divide and say, well, what's going to happen if? And you lean into those conversations. You sort of say, cool, well, this is actually what we're trying to do. So if you want to be part of this, then this is what would be most useful.
Exactly. You see, purpose and passion are magnetic.
Right.
And a lot of people walk around half dead. And I'm very much alive and present.
Yeah.
And I think that people want to be part of something that is visibly doing good.
Right. Absolutely.
And the whole point of my book was to say that I am not special, that each and every one of us can find what it is, because there's absolutely no doubt that I have found my calling.
Yeah, clearly.
But each and every one of us can find our calling, and it doesn't have to look like mine.
Right.
It doesn't have to look like starting a charity.
Right.
It can look like you, Vincent, having your bliss while you do a podcast with whoever you're doing your podcast.
Absolutely.
And it's about, and that's the point I try to stress in the book. People look at me and say, oh my God, she must be special.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I am. I think I've just put together all the pieces that have put me in full alignment of where it is that I need to go. And I didn't always know that. And I bumbled and scrambled my way through and naively did this and did that without ever fear of failure. And then what I've cooked and baked is this.
The serendipitous. I think you talk about the ingredients, right? I think it's on the back cover of the book, actually. just on that, and the book is nuanced and interesting, and it's fun, and like it's an exciting book, and I absolutely encourage people to go and read it. So that's for sure. It's called A Repurposed Life, by the way, if anyone's looking for it. And there we go, perfect. And
they're not going to see us.
They're not going to see us. No, it'll be audio only, but we'll put links to it. But it's something that's interesting that happens in it, and I'm kind of reminded of that kind of overplayed kind of speech from Steve Jobs where he talks about hard to connect the dots looking forward. And I think that the story itself is a beautiful, interesting, and challenging story in a lot of respects. There's a lot of things in there and a lot of challenges that you've gone through. And did you feel like you were building towards where you were going to land, or it was really only when you arrived that you went, some of that now makes sense?
Totally. I will be honest. It would be disingenuous of me to say I plotted my course. That would be the biggest load of bullshit I could ever say. It's this, but what I did do, and what I will absolutely, in a way, take credit for, is I opened myself up to every opportunity and took each opportunity. And I think and some of them didn't work.
Right.
And some of them failed.
Yeah.
And then you pick yourself up and you do it again.
Yeah.
And so I think that is, I would hate anybody to think, oh my God, she was so smart. She just did this and saw what it was going to be.
Yeah.
Not at all. I'm still in awe every single day. I pinch myself and say, wow, how did this happen?
So lucky to have arrived here. And probably just, I guess, in a kind of a closing note now, there's a couple of Jewish phrases, I guess, or terms. You're talking about kibbutz and tikkun olam. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, it's the most important one.
Yeah, and I got that as a thread through the book, that this kind of foundational belief, and it comes up pretty early, and it was something that's instilled in you early and clearly is still a pretty clear marker for you. How is that, just explain what that concept is for people, and also where that's pointing you from here forward.
Yeah, so the concept of tikkun olam, the literal translation is repair the world.
Right.
But it is incumbent on each and every one of us to find, well, one, we're broken and the world is broken, and how would we fix the world?
Right.
Just to look at the world as if there is something we can do to add value to the world.
Sure.
And I think when you do have that as the premise, anything you do is framed through that lens.
Right.
And that's really, for me, the arc of, and I didn't know it early on, and I left South Africa and didn't fight that cause, but found different ways along the way until it all gelled for me.
Got it.
So I think it's that notion, and that's, I guess, one of the abiding principles that I would love people to leave with, one, having read the book or having heard us today, is in what way can I make a difference and be the ripple, be the stone that creates that ripple? And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering.
Right.
It would be earth-shattering to one person, and that is another very Jewish belief that if you change one person, if you save the life of one person, you've changed the world.
Right.
Because you have no idea what that one person will do in their life.
Right.
And it's that ripple effect. And so, by being kind, by being generous, by being nice, by being thoughtful, all of those are ways, random acts of kindness,
Right.
Are the ways that we can fulfill that without having to start a charity. I just happen to have been really, really fortunate that I saw this gap, filled it, and it became this bigger than my life. But in every way we can do that.
Yeah, wonderful.
And that's the most important part.
Oh, that's wonderful. Ronni, I feel like we could talk a lot more. I think it would be incumbent upon people who are listening to this to go and read the book and to get a bit closer to the OzHarvest mission. I think there's something in that for everyone. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I really hope we can reach them more.
Thank you so much. I'll just end by saying that I believe that OzHarvest is a magnet for magnificent people.
Wonderful.
So when people come to us, their magnificence is amplified as well. So we love that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
And for the conversation.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.